a lot more things that we want to cover today. Okay. So a couple of things that all of you noticed it, right? One thing is, even if you make a mistake, your page still gets displayed. It just won't get displayed properly, right? If you made a mistake, like I didn't put a title, right? It still actually displayed the page. It didn't prevent me from doing it, right? So HTML is not very strongly enforced, but at the same time it is sensitive, right? If you didn't put one of the quotes, it'll ignore the whole text and will continue whatever the next element that comes in, and it puts it in the page. Okay. So that's the key thing that you want to make sure that you understand it, that if your HTML is not found properly, it'll still get displayed in the browser. It will not stop from doing it. That's where a lot of times if your page looks funky when you're trying to pull up an application, right? It's either it's going through tags that are not supported in that browser, or that page was not found properly. Okay. On HTML pages we talked about, right? You can add a link, put different properties into it, right? So width, height, alignment. You can put, if the text doesn't, if the image doesn't get displayed, what should be the alternate text message that it should display, and so on. One of the important reasons too, you want to make sure you are able to understand an HTML page looking at it, and if there are issues, you can identify, hey, here is the reason why this is not getting displayed as a bug. Second thing is, if you want to do any automation, you should be able to read through the HTML page and understand what are the type of data input and data objects are there. Because that's where you're going to introspect it on the runtime to get the value in and out, or to put the information into. Okay. So on HTML, as I mentioned, there is a w3schools.org, which is a very good source. It has a very nice tutorial. It'll allow you to just do exactly similar things like what we did. It is just take a small, keep adding one control at a time, or one tag at a time, and help you understand. Okay. So now let's get into the second component, which is an XML. Let's talk about an XML is an extensible markup language. Okay. This is the language that is used in the documents where you want to have it the structured information. Okay. So let's take an example. If you want to, if I'm an Amazon type of business, right? So I'll have a whole bunch of products. I'll have a whole bunch of categories in it, and underneath that I'll have each of the items, right? So if I logically think about that structure, I would have something like products, right? Then I may have electronic products. I may have print products, right? And I may have other categories. Okay. Within electronic, right, I may have Blu-ray type of products. I may have DVD. I may have a digital. Within print, I may have a soft cover books, and I may have a hardcover books. Or I may have it just simple into a news type of prints. Underneath that, now then I can identify, hey, I have, there's essentially one particular movie, second or third, and so on. So when you look at this information, it's much more structured, right? So XML is used to represent this kind of structured information. So a couple of key difference, right? XML is an extensible markup language. HTML is hypertext markup language. So essentially, they both are markup language. And the purpose of markup language is so that your computers can parse through it based on certain markups inserted into the document. It can essentially interpret that document appropriately for a display purpose or for processing purposes. Okay. So in HTML, you had a fixed set of text. If you mistype a tag, then it just doesn't recognize it, ignores it, and moves on to the next. Right? It never gives you an error message. So if I, instead of title, if I typed only TTLE, something like that, it will say, hey, this tag is not recognized. I'm going to ignore it. I'm going to go ahead and move forward to the next tag and process it. Right? So it doesn't recognize. XML, on the other hand, is an extensible markup language. Right? So you can extend the tags. So you can define your own tag. Right? So for example, here, I could define my own tags like a product. And that will represent this particular hierarchy. So that's the benefit. You can define your own tags, which is much more useful when you're trying to pull together a structured set of information, that you can put the names that makes much more meaningful name to you. It is a content oriented. In other words, it's really important of what information you put it in, versus HTML is a presentation oriented. It doesn't matter what information you put in it, it just takes that information and tries to present that. Okay. There is no data validation capabilities. I could put whatever I wanted. Here, it enforces the data structure. Okay. So it looks at make sure that I have the right sets of information inserted correctly. It's only a single presentation. In one HTML, I can have only one page that's going to be displayed. I can have only one head text, set of text. I can have only one set of body. Versus, in case of XML, I can have as many products as I want. So here is an example, right? If I'm trying to get somebody's address, and I can have it city tags. Now the difference in it between HTML tags and XML tags is XML tags are case sensitive. Right? So if I'm doing it this city, right? If I put the same exact tag, or put it into HTML, right? It'll all be considered as a single tag. In case of an XML, they have 3 different tags. So I cannot have something like city and then do a city lowercase and expect this to start and end it. That will happen in the case of HTML, but it will not happen in case of XML. Now you can abbreviate the tags into XML. Remember how we talked about that I'll have started marker, end marker, and the value or information within that. In case, if I want to represent something that doesn't have a value in XML, I can abbreviate the tags to be just a simple, just by followed by and slash. Okay. So that allows me to eliminate the clutter and sometimes, because when you're trying to put in information together, right? So for example, let's say you take a credit application and I want to represent that into XML format. There are a lot of fields that are optional, so may not be specified. Right? So I'll have a lot more tags without any values. So having this kind of thing helps it to quickly put together a document and so on. It's more convenience rather than it's a necessity. You can still put it like start tag, end tag without a value in it. Just like HTML, you can put also an attributes within the tags. Right. Here I can have it as zip. Right. The purpose is that it allows me as a secondary level of information within the tag. So, similar to HTML, right, you can do a nesting of the tags. and represent. So here is an example of how the book is present, right? So this is my entire library of all the books collection. Within that, I have a book element, which has a secondary information of ISBN, right, which allows me to uniquely identify that. And then I have a title and an author. I can put a table of content, I can put it actual content, or the type, right? It could be a print, it could be an electronic book. You can put all those sets of information. Okay. So, looks familiar? Right, so I have a books, I have multiple books. Each one has all the sets of information. So if I want to take this sets of information and represent it in an XML document, this is how I would do it. I have 2 books within that, each with their different IDs, author, title, and year, published. In this case, there's no year information, so I just put only those 2. So in this case, even though you have some entities will have additional information, some may not have, right? So you can, this is a loosely structured XML which doesn't enforce all those things, but it's still a valid XML document. Okay. So here are some of the key rules for forming an XML document. Okay. Everything should have a start tag and an end tag. Okay. They must be nested clearly. Remember what we talked about head and title nesting? The same rule applies in XML. It has to be nested properly. Okay. If I'm trying to put an attribute values in anything in XML, it has to be in the quotation marks. Okay. And then each document must have a unique first element. Okay, it's called the root node. So in this case, the books is my root node, not the book. Okay. So you can have only one root element, right? But within that you can have a whole bunch of things, right? So in this case, when I was talking about products, right, I could have my catalog as my root element, and underneath it I can have as many products as I want. So let me show you a quick XML document. Okay. So this is the same one that we talked. The only difference is it needs to have a header which talks about what XML version of this is. So it tells a browser or any other thing, says how do I supposed to interpret it. So let's take a look at this thing and how it will look in browser. And the reason I want you to show it in the browser is typically XMLs are not used to view in the browser. Right? Its purpose is to go from a machine to machine. So remember we talked about the shopping cart checkout in the Amazon, where I need to go to somewhere else to find whether it's a valid credit card or valid form of payment or not. So when it goes to sense out that information, typically it sends out in an XML format. Okay. So it's typically used from one component to another component for the communication. Right? But you can also view it in the browser. And it's a really useful feature when you are able to look into the browser. So when later in the next half an hour, when you start looking at the web services, you will see exactly what the benefit it brings it to see an XML in the browser. Okay, so I'm going to open this thing into the browser. Alright, so it's open up in browser. Okay, so the document tree is shown below. So look at this, right? It's a neat thing. You can, if you're having some issue to figure it out why a particular element is not there, you can essentially open or close the tags. You look into detail, specifically only the item that you are interested in, to see whether it is shown. why do we essentially do it? Right? So we're going to start looking at the web services here in a minute. And the whole purpose of testing web services is through the SOAP UI tools. But in order for you to test the web service, you need to understand the structure of how it's formed, what are the operations, like what information is being passed, what information you're going to receive it back. All of those things is defined within the form of XML. And that's why it's important for you to do it. Most of the modern day application is going to use some sort of web services or some sort of machine-to-machine communication to get some sort of information. And majority of those is done in XML code. So that's a very high-level XML overview. So let's do one thing. Let's take about 10-minute break, and then we will dive into web services, and then we'll get into this group.
What I was saying, Dilip, was if they want to work through that example, creating that on the machine while anybody's taking break, then
so
they can do that.
Taking break, if you want to play around, continue with HTML, or you want to play it and